Hey everyone, it's Mr. Miles. This is the video for Wednesday, March the 29th. I'm going to give you this video. This is the last kind of daily lesson video I'm going to record because Thursday, you're just going to be working on your one pager all day. That's just the project work day. Um, you've got colored pencils in the drawers, you've got markers. I'll leave copy paper out for you to pick up and use. If you want to do your word pager that way. I'll also have some templates printed out that you can use as well. But that's essentially it. So I don't really feel the need to record a video for Thursday, Friday. But this is the last video for Beowulf and the actual reading of the text. Um, I'll go ahead and remind you, make sure that you are answering questions for each reading day on Google Classroom. Those are daily grades or Easy 100. So just make sure that you're doing those and following the directions on those. All right. But as for today, this is the last battle, obviously. And there's no real secret to it. Beowulf is going to die. All right. Obviously, it's Beowulf's last battle. So, again, to remind you, Beowulf is kind of three chunks. Okay. The story. The first chunk is Grendel shows up, Beowulf fights Grendel, Beowulf wins. The middle chunk is Grendel's mother shows up, Beowulf fights Grendel's mom, Beowulf wins. The third chunk is a little different because the third chunk takes place 50 years after the events of Beowulf fighting Grendel's mom. And so Beowulf is now an old man, okay? If he was in his prime when he fought Grendel and Grendel's mom, so like mid-20s, 30, he's probably now in his late 70s or 80s right now. So he is an old man, okay? And so he is now king of the Geats. He is back in Sweden, and he is now king of the Geats. And so he becomes a good king. He's prosperous, fights off a bunch of invaders. He's a good king, and people respect him and they follow him. One day, however, a thief kind of stumbles his way into a cave, and he sees like this giant mound of treasure, and he thinks to himself, wow, this is all just fair game. I'm going to really enjoy having some treasure. And so he steals a cup. And in these stories, when you find a giant cave just full of mountains of gold and treasure and jewels, you shouldn't steal anything from them, but people always do, because what happens is those caves full of treasure are usually guarded by a dragon. And so in this situation, there is in fact a dragon who notices that someone took his cup, and he proceeds to start burning down the entire countryside. The whole kingdom is now in jeopardy because of this giant dragon just burning stuff down. So one thing to note about dragons in Anglo-Saxon stories is they are often called worms, okay, not dragons, okay. And obviously, if you look at the word worm, okay, it looks a lot like the word worm. Well, there's a point to that because worms are long and kind of serpentine, and that's kind of how the Anglo-Saxon dragons were depicted. They were not necessarily depicted in like the kind of traditional dragon way. Okay, I mean, sure they had wings and they had claws and things like that, but they were much more snake-like than I think we kind of give credit to believing. And so the thing about dragons in Anglo-Saxon belief systems is that people thought that they were basically two things. They were very greedy. They loved anything shiny. And so if they ever found anything shiny, they would take it back to their gold hoard, is what they called it, their treasure cave, where they would just pile the gold up, goblets, gold, and jewels. And if you've ever seen the Hobbit movies or read the book, you'll know that Smaug, the dragon from the Hobbit, he's very much the stereotypical Anglo-Saxon dragon. Okay, he loves his gold. Okay, and the dragons don't typically do anything until somebody takes a piece of their gold. Okay. So in early Christian belief, the dragons were symbolic of obviously evil and Satan. In the Bible, they actually refer to Satan as a dragon. But they also represent problems or vices or sins that anybody, any regular person could commit. The main two being greed, obviously. The dragons represent greed. They symbolize greed and how greed can corrupt us. And they also symbolize another sin called sloth. And sloth is essentially just being lazy, idle, not doing anything. Because the dragons don't do anything. They sleep on their giant pile of gold until someone takes a little piece of gold, and then they all, go crazy. So the dragons symbolize kind of two things that Christians in this time period were wanting people to avoid: being lazy and being greedy. Okay, and so kind of understand that symbolism as we read more about the dragon encounter. And so the dragons destroy the countryside. Beowulf essentially feels like, I have to go and save the kingdom. I have to go save everybody again. But he's an old man now. And so he's not going to do what he did with Grendel, where he just goes in, with no armor, no weapon. He's going to wear armor, and he's going to have a shield, and he's going to fight with a weapon. Okay. Not just because he's old, but because this dragon also does something that Grendel and Grendel's mother didn't do, which is it breathes fire. Okay. And so he's got to deal with that. So he's going to use a shield. He's also not going in alone. He didn't technically fight Grendel alone, but it was basically a one-on-one fight. His men just kind of stood around and helped by cheering him on. And the fight with Grendel's mother was a one-on-one fight. Nobody went in with him to the bottom of the lake because, he's an Epicuro. He's the only one who can do that. This fight, however, he takes his men with him. He takes his, best warriors, his 14 best warriors with him to fight the dragon. And he's like, obviously they are sworn by oath to stand beside him as he fights it. And, they're like his most trusted, bravest warriors. And so he's not going to go fight this dragon by himself. He might be arrogant and prideful or whatever you want to call it, but he's not stupid. And so he's going to fight this dragon with every piece of ammunition that he needs to beat it. Okay. And so he goes and he fights the dragon, and immediately realizes that he's kind of in over his head. All of his men abandon him. They take one look at that dragon and they turn tail and they run away. All except one of them, a man named Wiglaf. Beowulf realizes that the dragon's fire can melt his shield, and it starts to melt the shield as he's like holding it up to protect himself. And he can't get close to the dragon because of the fire breath. And things are looking very grave for Beowulf. Things are looking not great at all for him. And Wiglaf, the one warrior who did not abandon him, charges in, helps Beowulf fight and defeat the dragon. But the dragon, because remember, I say it's a worm, it's more snake-like. It also has venom, manages to bite Beowulf as he stabs it, and the bite is obviously venomous, and so Beowulf is dying at this point. He kills the dragon, but he has to die. And so he gets bitten, he's dying of poison, and he basically tells Wiglaf two things before he dies. First off, he tells Wiglaf, and that's how you spell his name right here. Wiglaf, show me the treasure. Show me the prettiest things that I just died for, okay? And if you've been thinking that this is a very, religiously motivated poem, motivated story, obviously the author is really trying to turn Beowulf into this Christian warrior. This is a moment where the kind of pagan origins of the poem kind of pokes through a little bit, because I don't think many Christian warriors would want to, be dying and have their kind of last request be like, show me the gold I died for, right? So that's kind of a pagan thing sort of poking its face through the text a little bit. Even though the monks tried their best to turn Beowulf into this Christian warrior, he still is, at his core, it is a pagan story. He is a pagan hero. And so some of the things that he does and says, you can still see those pagan influences. And then the second request he makes is that he asks them to, when he dies, build me a giant burial mound. Okay, and essentially the way that people were buried back then is they had these giant barrows, is what they called them, giant mounds of earth, and they were stored inside with all their treasure. Um, because they believed, the pagans believed that if I put my treasure into my tomb, then I get to take it with me in the afterlife. Okay, obviously Christians don't believe that. They believe that you die, you go to heaven, you can't take all your earthly possessions with you. Beowulf requests that Wiglaf and everybody else, all the Geats, build him a giant tower overlooking a cliff, and that be his kind of burial mound. And the tower will be kind of like a beacon, so that ships guiding, sailing in the night can see and guide them to safety. So Beowulf wants his death to be, useful far beyond his actual burial, his funeral. He wants essentially his tombstone to be a lighthouse, so that these ships who are sailing can see the beacon and they can go to safety. So Beowulf wants that for them. And obviously, the lighthouse is a very kind of, the guiding light. The light will show me the way, guide my steps. Like, it's very Christian imagery right there. But he also tells Wiglaf, take all the treasure from this dragon's cave and put it in that burial mound, put it in that tower, and nobody can ever use it again because it's my treasure, right? And that's a very pagan thing, right? So you've got this almost Christian symbol of the lighthouse, the beacon guiding ships to safety, to heaven. And then you've got the pagan, let's put the treasure in the lighthouse. Let's put all the gold in there where nobody can use it, but just the dead man, okay? And so again, you've got this tension between these two uh, worldviews, the Christian one and the pagan one. And then you read the story about Beowulf's funeral, Beowulf's burial, and how everybody mourned him. And so that's essentially Beowulf in a nutshell. Okay, that's kind of the broad strokes of it. Obviously, you need to read the poem itself to get the most out of it, but that's essentially what happens. So if you have any questions about that, about the gist of the poem or what happens in the poem, please shoot me a reminder. I'll be happy to explain it in more detail if there's anything you don't get. But that's it for the poem and really for the week, because now you can kind of think about, once I finish reading this section or these sections, I need to start thinking about my one pager and kind of developing that one pager a bit. So that's it. That's all I've got. Have a good week.